Section 0 of the Lives of the Queens of England, Volume 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Anne Boulay. The Lives of the Queens of England by Agnes and Elisabeth Strickland. Preface and Introduction. Preface. An announcement of this work, the first volume of which is now submitted to the public, appeared in the Literary Gazette of August 26, 1837, and other leading periodicals of the day, under its original title of Historical Memoirs of the Queens of England. I had previously had the honor of communicating to Her Majesty Queen Victoria that for some years I had been engaged in preparing for publication the personal history of those royal ladies, from many of whom her own illustrious descent is derived, and I was favored with a most gracious permission from Her Majesty to dedicate the work to herself. A long and dangerous illness delayed the publication of the first series. Meantime, the title I had chosen was appropriated by another writer, and, under that very title, memoirs have been published of some of the queens whose biographies, in regular and unbroken succession, are comprised in the present series of the Lives of the Queens of England. Biography, however, especially when historically treated, is a widely extended field, to which all laborers are freely welcomed in this intelligent age of inquiry. Such opposite views, indeed, are taken of the same events and characters, by persons of differently constituted minds, that the cause of truth is sure to be benefited, when the research of several writers is directed to the same subjects. Facts, not opinions, should be the motto of every candid historian, and it is a sacred duty to assert nothing lightly, or without good evidence, of those who can no longer answer for themselves. I have borne in mind the charge which prefaces the juryman's oath. It runs as follows: You shall truly and justly try this cause. You shall present no one from malice. You shall excuse no one from favor, etc., etc. Feeling myself thus charged by each and every one of the buried queens of England, whose actions, from the cradle to the tomb, I was about to lay before the public, I considered the responsibility of the task, rather than the necessity of expediting the publication of the work. The number of authorities required, some of which could not be obtained in England, and the deep research among the Norman, Provençal, French, and monastic Latin chroniclers, that was indispensably necessary, made it impossible to hurry out a work which I hope to render permanently useful. As it has been one of my principal objects to render the Lives of our queens a work of general interest to every class of readers, I have modernized the orthography of extracts from ancient authors, and endeavored as much as possible to avoid prolix and minute details, on matters more suited to the researches of the antiquary than to the volumes which, I would fain hope, may find a place in domestic libraries, as well as public literary institutions. The introduction contains brief notices of our ancient British and Saxon queens. Their records are, indeed, too scanty to admit of any other arrangement. Yet a work professing to be the history of female royalty of our country would have been incomplete without some mention of those princesses. The plan of chronological arrangement adopted in this work presented, at first sight, great difficulties in writing the lives of the queens who survived their royal husbands, and were involved, as queen dowagers, with the annals of succeeding queen consorts. Sometimes there have been 2 dowager queens of England contemporaries, or 2 dowager queens and a queen consort, as in the reign of John, when Eleanora, the widow of Henry II., Berengaria, the widow of Richard I., and Isabella, the consort of John, were all in existence at the same period. In these instances and others where it has been necessary to avoid the evil of a twice-told tale, or confusion of dates, the sequel of the Queen Dowager's memoirs has been related among the chronological events of the era to which it belonged. The biographies of the queens of England commence, in their natural order, with the life of Matilda, the consort of William the Conqueror, the first of our Anglo-Norman queens, and the mother of the succeeding line of kings, whose dynasty, in the person of our present sovereign lady, Queen Victoria, occupies the throne of England. Independently of her important position among the queens of England, the incidents of the life of Matilda are peculiarly interesting, and it affords me much pleasure to make her better known to the English reader, since the rich materials of which her memoir is composed are chiefly derived from untranslated Norman and Latin chronicles. The history of the Empress Matilda is incorporated with those of the contemporary queens of England, with whose annals the events of her life are inseparably connected. As the uniting link of the Anglo-Saxon and Anglo-Norman dynasties, as the mother of the royal line of Plantagenet kings, the Empress Matilda is a character of great importance to the annals of England, but she has never been included by any historian, either ancient or modern, in the catalogue of English sovereigns. Even on her great seal, she claimed no other title than that of Domina of England, and as she was neither a crowned nor anointed sovereign, and, though queen de jure, she failed to establish her rights by force, and voluntarily ceded them to her son Henry II., a separate memoir of this princess could not, with propriety, appear among those of the queens of England. The life of Berengaria, the crusading queen of Richard Coeur de Lion, is for the first time presented to the public, in the second volume of this work. The memoir of Isabella of Valois, the virgin widow of Richard II., with whose eventful history some authors are little acquainted, is included in these biographies. The memoir of Margaret of Anjou contains a portion of her life which is at present unknown to English historians, the details of her childhood and early youth. These are derived from the most authentic sources, and comprise many new particulars, both of her personal and public life as Queen of England, and the mournful epoch of her widowhood. The life of Catharine Parr will, I venture to hope, form an attractive portion of the 5th volume of the Lives of the Queens of England, my ancestral connection with that queen affording me peculiar facilities as her biographer. The personal histories of the Anglo-Norman and several of the Plantagenet queens are involved in such great obscurity, that it has cost years of patient research, among English and foreign chronicles, ancient records, antiquarian literature, and collateral sources of information of various kinds, to trace out the events of their lives from the cradle to the grave. The most difficult part of the undertaking is now achieved, for the concluding volumes of the Lives and Times of the Queens of England belong to eras abounding in authentic materials for royal biography. State papers, autograph letters, and other important documents, which the antiquarian taste of the present age has drawn forth from repositories, where they have slumbered among the dust of centuries, to afford their silent but incontrovertible evidence, on matters connected both with the public and private history of royalty, enable those writers who, unbiased by the leaven of party spirit, deal in facts rather than opinions, to unravel the tangled web of falsehood, and to set forth the truth in all sincerity. In conclusion, I have to acknowledge my obligations to His Grace, the Duke of Norfolk, and to Mr. Howard of Corby, the descendants of Queen Adelicia, for some important particulars connected with the life of that princess, for which I was indebted to the memorials of the Howard family. To Mr. Howard, indeed, my thanks are peculiarly due, as well as to his accomplished son, Philip H. Howard, Esquire, M.P. for Carlisle. I am likewise deeply indebted to my learned friends, Sir Thomas Phillips of Middlehill, Sir Harris Nicholas, and Sir Cuthbert Sharp, for their inestimable kindness in regard to MSS, and books of reference. The courteous attention I have received from Sir William Woods, Garter King at Arms, and the valuable assistance afforded by G. F. Belts, Esquire, Lancaster Herald, and C. G. Young, Esquire, York Herald, claim also my grateful remembrance. My acknowledgments must likewise be offered to the Earl of Stradbroke, Lord Manners, D. E. Davy, Esquire, and other learned and noble individuals in my native country, who have facilitated my arduous undertaking, by placing their extensive and valuable libraries at my disposal, Nor can I omit to express my sincere appreciation of the courteous attention and assistance I have received during my researches from Mr. Cates and Mr. Grabham, librarians at the British Museum, and other gentlemen connected with that national treasury of learning. My warmest thanks are due to my accomplished friend, Mademoiselle Fontaine, of Neuilly, for her unwearied kindness in supplying me with foreign chronicles, and in transcribing French documents from the Bibliothèque du Roi, not always accessible in England; also to the Rev. J. Hunter, of the Augmentation Record Office; to J. Bruce, Esq., the treasurer of the Camden Society, and the learned editor of some of its publications; to J. O. Halliwell, Esq., to whose research and literary labors that society is so much indebted; and last, not least, to that dear sister who is my fellow laborer and faithful assistant in the lives of the queens of England, though she has forbidden her name to be united on the title page with that of Agnes Strickland. Reydon Hall, Suffolk, December 16th, 1839. Introduction. The Queen of England, says the learned commentator on the laws and constitution of this country, Blackstone, is either Queen Regnant, Queen Consort, or Queen Dowager. The first of these is a female sovereign reigning in her own right, and exercising all the functions of regal authority in her own person, as in the case of her present Majesty, Queen Victoria, who ascended the throne, both by rightful inheritance, the consent of the people, and also in full accordance with the ancient British custom, noticed by Tacitus in these remarkable words: Solent feminarum ducta bellare, et sexum in imperiis non discernere. No other princess has, however, been enthroned in this land under such auspicious circumstances as our present sovereign lady. Mary I was not recognized without bloodshed. Elizabeth's title was disputed. Mary II was only a sovereign in name, and as much dependent on the will of her royal husband as a queen consort. The Archbishop of Canterbury forfeited the primacy of England for declining to assist at her coronation, or to take the oaths. The same scruples of conscience withheld the non-juring bishops and clergy, and many of the nobility and gentry of England, from performing their homage either to her or to Queen Anne. Not one of those four queens, therefore, was crowned with the unanimous consent of her people, but the rapturous acclamations that drowned the pealing of the bells and the thunders of the artillery, at the recognition of our beloved liege lady, Queen Victoria, in Westminster Abbey, can never be forgotten by those who then heard the voices of a united nation uplifted in assent. I was present, and felt the massy walls of the Abbey thrill, from base to tower, with the mighty sound, as the burst of loyal enthusiasm within that august sanctuary was echoed by the thronging multitude without, hailing her queen by universal suffrage. The Queen Regnant, in addition to the cares of government, has to preside over all the arrangements connected with female royalty, which, in the reign of a married king, devolve on the Queen Consort. She has, therefore, more to occupy her time and attention than a king, for whom the laws of England expressly provide, that he is not to be troubled with his wife's affairs, like an ordinary husband. There have been but 3 unmarried kings of England, William Rufus, Edward V., and Edward VI. The 2 latter were removed at a very tender age, but the Red King was a determined bachelor, and his court, unrestrained by the presence and beneficial influence of a queen, was the focus of profaneness and all evil doing. The queens of England, commencing the series with Matilda, the wife of William the Conqueror, are 40 in number, including her present Majesty, Queen Victoria, the sovereign of these realms, and Adelaide, our revered Queen Dowager. Of these, 5 are Queen Regnants, or sovereigns, and 35 Queen Consorts. Our present series begins, not according to rank, but chronological order, with the Queen Consorts, of whom there were 26, before a female monarch ascending the throne, combined in her own person the high office of Queen and Sovereign of England. The lives of the Queen Regnants will appear in due course. our great object being to present, in a regular and connected chain, the history of female royalty, to trace the progress of civilization, learning, and refinement in this country, and to show how greatly these were affected by queenly influence in all ages. The wives of the kings of England, though wisely excluded by the constitution of the realm from any share in the government, have frequently exercised considerable authority in affairs of state, and some have been regents of the kingdom. Every one has been more or less a character of historical importance, as will be shown in their respective biographies. The earliest British queen named in history is Cartismandua, who, though a married woman, appears to have been the sovereign of the Brigantes, reigning in her own right. This was about the year 50. Boadicea, or Bodva, the warrior queen of the Iceni, succeeded her deceased lord, King Prasutagus, in regal office. Speed gives us a curious print of one of her coins in his chronicle. The description of her dress and appearance, on the morning of the battle that ended so disastrously for the royal Amazon and her country, quoted from a Roman historian, is remarkably picturesque. After she had dismounted from her chariot, in which she had been driving from rank to rank to encourage her troops, attended by her daughters and her numerous army, she proceeded to a throne of marshy tufts, apparelled after the fashion of the Romans, in a loose gown of changeable colors, under which she wore a kirtle very thickly plaited, the tresses of her yellow hair hanging to the skirts of her dress. About her neck she wore a chain of gold, and bore a light spear in her hand, being of person tall, and of a comely, cheerful, and modest countenance, and so a while she stood, pausing to survey her army, and being regarded with reverential silence, she addressed to them an impassioned and eloquent speech on the wrongs of her country. The overthrow and death of this heroic princess took place in the year 60. There is every reason to suppose that the majestic code of laws, called the Common Law of England, usually attributed to Alfred, were derived by him from the laws first established by a British queen. Marcia, says Holinstead, surnamed Proba, or the Just, was the widow of Guteline, king of the Britons, and was left protectress of the realm during the minority of her son. Perceiving much in the conduct of her subjects which needed reformation, she devised sundry wholesome laws which the Britons, after her death, named the Martian Statutes. Alfred calls the laws of this excellently learned princess, whom all commended for her knowledge of the Greek tongue, to be established in the realm. These laws, embracing trial by jury and the just descent of property, were afterwards collated and still farther improved by Edward the Confessor, and were as pertinaciously demanded from the successors of William the Conqueror by the Anglo-Normans as by their Anglo-Saxon subjects. Rowena, the wily Saxon princess, who, in an evil hour for the unhappy people of the land, became the consort of Vortigern in the year 450, is the next queen whose name occurs in our early annals. Guinevere, the golden-haired queen of Arthur, and her faithless successor and namesake, have been so mixed up with the tales of the romance poets and troubadours that it would be difficult to trace a single fact connected with either. Among the queens of the Saxon Heptarchy, we hail the nursing mothers of the Christian faith in this island, who firmly established the good work begun by the British Lady Claudia and the Empress Helena. The first and most illustrious of these queens was Bertha, the daughter of Charibert, king of Paris, who had the glory of converting her pagan husband, Ethelbert, the king of Kent, to that faith of which she was so bright an ornament, and of planting the first Christian church at Canterbury. Her daughter, Ethelburga, was in like manner the means of inducing her valiant lord, Edwin, king of Northumbria, to embrace the Christian faith. Eanfled, the daughter of this illustrious pair, afterwards the consort of Oswy, king of Mercia, was the first individual who received the sacrament of baptism in Northumbria. In the 8th century, the consorts of the Saxon kings were excluded, by a solemn law, from sharing in the honors of royalty, on account of the crimes of the queen Edburga, who had poisoned her husband Bittrick, king of Wessex, and even when Egbert consolidated the kingdoms of the Heptarchy into an empire, of which he became the Bretwalda, or sovereign, His queen Redburga was not permitted to participate in his coronation. Osburga, the first wife of Ethelwulf, and the mother of the great Alfred, was also debarred from this distinction; but when, on her death, or, as some historians say, her divorce, Ethelwulf espoused the beautiful and accomplished Judith, the sister of the emperor of the Franks, he violated this law by placing her beside him on the king's bench, and allowing her a chair of state, and all the other distinctions to which her high birth entitled her. This afforded a pretense to his ungallant subjects for a general revolt, headed by his eldest son Ethelbald, by whom he was deprived of half his dominions. Yet Ethelbald, on his father's death, was so captivated by the charms of the fair cause of his parricidal rebellion, that he outraged all Christian decency by marrying her. The beautiful and unfortunate Elgiva, the consort of Edwy, has afforded a favourite theme of poetry and romance, but the partisans of her great enemy, Dunstan, have so mystified her history, that it would be no easy matter to give an authentic account of her life. Elfrida, the fair and false queen of Edgar, has acquired an infamous celebrity, for her remorseless hardness of heart. She did not possess the talents necessary to the accomplishment of her design of seizing the reins of government, after she had assassinated her unfortunate stepson at Corfe Castle, for in this she was entirely circumvented by the political genius of Dunstan, the master spirit of the age. Emma of Normandy, the beautiful queen of Ethelred, and afterwards Canute, plays a conspicuous part in the Saxon annals. There is a Latin treatise, written in her praise by a contemporary historian, entitled Encomium Emme, but, notwithstanding the florid commendations there bestowed upon her, the character of this queen must be considered a doubtful one. The manner in which she sacrificed the interests of her children by her first husband, Ethelred, to those of her second unnatural marriage with the Danish conqueror, is little to her credit, and was certainly never forgiven by her son, Edward the Confessor, though that monarch, after he had witnessed the triumphant manner in which she cleared herself of the charges brought against her by her foes, by passing through the ordeal of walking barefoot, unscathed, over the 9 red-hot ploughshares in Winchester Cathedral, threw himself at her feet in a transport of filial penitence, implored her pardon with tears, and submitted to the discipline at the high altar, as a penance for having exposed her to such a test of her innocence. Editha, the consort of Edward the Confessor, was not only an amiable, but a learned lady. The Saxon historian Ingulphus, himself a scholar at Westminster Monastery, close by Editha's palace, affirms that the queen used frequently to intercept him and his schoolfellows in her walks, and ask them questions on their progress in Latin, or in the words of his translator, moot points of grammar with them, in which she oftentimes posed them. Sometimes she gave them a piece of silver or two out of her own purse, and sent them to the palace buttery, to breakfast. She was skillful in the works of the needle, and with her own hands she embroidered the garments of her royal husband, Edward the Confessor. Editha is perhaps the most interesting of all our Saxon queens, and it was not without regret that we felt precluded, by the nature of the plan we have adopted, from including her in the present series of the lives of the queens of England. End of section 0.